Good afternoon, everyone. I am the one standing between you and lunch. So do I proceed or don't I? Proceed to leave the stage or to present? Okay, I will try my best to keep it short. Mine is quite simply to just give you a couple of highlights on what we did find in the small research that we did starting sometime last year. So, let's see if this works. Oh, it does work. Fantastic. So the title of the research work that we did was Advancing Women's Leadership in the Kenyan Healthcare Sector. And our overarching question or dilemma was whether the rungs on the organizational ladder are broken or whether there is no ladder at all. In essence, what we are basically asking is, when you look at the makeup of the organizational hierarchy, a number of the speakers have already alluded to this. The base of the structure is very heavily populated by women, but as you get towards the apex, it then takes on this triangular shape. And so the question is, why are they falling off? And a number of the speakers here have already given you some ideas, but we wanted to go beyond hearsay. We wanted to go beyond personal experience and feeling to actually try and attach very specific numbers to this dilemma. Now, there was a big team behind this, and the ones that I have put in there are representations of the technical team, but as my dean said, behind that there was also a very big administrative team that helped us with all the organizational work and getting us to the sites that we needed to be, and so on and so forth. Now, what is the background of the study? This is the global background of the study, and it speaks to exactly what I have just said. If you see down here, I don't know, the pointer doesn't seem to be working, is it? Oh, it is, eh? But at the base here, you can see that we have quite a number. Nurses who form the backbone of any health service delivery form about 80% of the workforce at that place there. Now, you move a little bit higher, and now you combine the health workers in their entirety, then you still see that women still comprise just about 30%, slightly more of that. But now, if you just follow the red dynamic there, you can see that the figures represented by those red personas there become less and less as we move all the way to the top there. And this is very recent data that we unashamedly borrowed from women in global health. Now, having said that, our study was premised on the fact that when you look at what is there in the literature, when you review what others have researched on and what they have found out, and you try to come up with some kind of organizing framework, in terms of what is it, what are the kind of elements that need to be in place in order for somebody to ascend to the top echelons of leadership. You will find that there are some things that are inherent on the individual, okay? And that is, if I give you now a sneak preview to how the foundation is supporting our work in country, that is where you will find institutions like Women Lift Health playing at that individual level. Then, away from the individual, there's a team around them, and a number of the speakers have spoken to that. Then you have organization-wide entities, and then, if you are like us who believe in systems, those organizations also operate within wider societies. So you have this sort of nested framework where you have the individual, the teams around them, the organizations, but the organizations within institutions. And the idea is that for a system to work, you need to appreciate the interconnectedness of the different pieces, in the sense that working on one element alone is not going to give you the desired result if the milieu within which the element you're working in is not working, then it's not going to work. Our remit, however, for the purpose of the study, was to focus on the organizational elements. And in this regard, we were particularly interested in the policies that exist within organizations in terms of whether they do exist at all, and if they do exist, how well are they, operationalized? We were interested in the organizational culture, and that is in trying to determine what aspects of culture tend to give or tend to present a more supportive milieu for women to advance in leadership. And then, of course, there is the organizational leadership itself. We've talked about sponsorship, we've talked about mentorship. So what kind of leadership is there in the organizations that can actually help to, in giving a hand up or in creating an environment by manipulating all the organizational pieces to enable the ascension of women to higher levels of leadership. Now, I will need this to move to the next slide. Okay, there we go. Any academic study is never complete if you don't have a diagram like this one. For those of you who've passed through us, you know that. So what we did was because of the nature of the questions that we were interested in, we decided to follow the two broad arms of research study design. So you do a survey. A survey usually tells you the what, and that is what we've highlighted there as the quantitative bit. It usually gives you the numbers. It gives you the state of play as it is. It tells you it's a very static kind of thing. And then you have the qualitative part, which is what then tells you the how and the why. Now, you can do either of these on their own, but when you combine them, you have a much more powerful study. And so for, just so that I can also impress those who are talking about endo something and molars, yeah, those ones, yeah? Rose, Waziri, you got me on this, eh? I can also talk about convergent parallel mixed methods design. Sindio? So that is what we followed. And the basic idea was that, when you have these two arms and you're able to combine that information, you have a much more richer data set. You can draw out a lot more nuances from the research that you have done. Now, our study population was, was the diversity of the health sector. So we looked at private and we looked at public. And in public, we looked at, various levels of facilities. On the private side, we also looked at those in manufacturing, in pharma, you name it. I think you can see nearly all of them there, okay? Because of the diversity that we had and the time and resource constraints, of course, we had to do a sampling, which in our case was what we would call a stratified random sampling. We divided the country into 8 regions, and within the 8 regions, we selected randomly, a number of counties, and from those counties, we then randomly selected a number of institutions. So there was quite a number of, and the idea of randomization was so that there is no bias in the findings that we do get. It is not that what we are going to present to you is because we went out to look for that thing, but it is really what is actually, in general, happening in the community around us. So we ended up with 403 organizations. We did about 3,000 or administered about 3,015 questionnaires. We did about 38 key informant interviews and about 3 focus group discussions. Now, what did this data tell us when we analyzed it? I will start by saying that the analysis is still a work in progress because this is quite a huge amount of data that we have to deal with. And we are still finding the right way of being able to put it together. But that being said, on policy, okay? If you recall, our interest was on policy, was on culture, and then was on the leadership aspects. And we'll see how all this ties in at the tail end. On policy, there was general agreement across the board that in the policy space we are not doing too badly. And I think there was ample evidence, even from the first panel, that there is some work that is going on in there, okay? Especially when it comes to ideas around remuneration for similar roles and for skill level. However, there were some subtle differences when you now begin to parcel out, when you begin to distinguish between sectors. So you find that, and it is in the order that we have put them there, between the public, private, and not-for-profit sector, there are differences as to whether promotions were actually in the real sense. So it's one thing to have the policy. That's the message I'm trying to drive across. It's one thing to have the policy, but whether it actually does get implemented, that is what this slide is trying to say here. That a number of the respondents felt that in practice, there's a possibility that those promotions, that equity that we are talking about, it does not necessarily happen in the way that the policy says that it should. And it is also in the same vein that the reaction that the criteria being clear and transparent, that wasn't really the case. And it's important for us to realize this because when we are trying to do any kind of action, then we now know, okay? So if I go back to the sentiments that were shared by the first panel here, a take-home now here is not necessarily to develop new policies, but to find out where the blocks are in terms of operationalizing those policies. That is really what this slide is trying to tell us. And then, of course, the last bullet there simply affirms what was mentioned, that more women than men felt unsupported when it comes to being able to adjust their work schedules to accommodate the various responsibilities that they have. Now, when it comes to organizational culture, again, many of our respondents felt that there's reasonably good treatment, reasonably equal treatment between men and women. But of course, we wanted to probe this a little bit further and try to determine whether there was a boys' club or was there a girls' club, okay, or something like this. And of course, you can see from here that in the private sector, it is quite stark that there is a feeling that it does exist there, but in the public sector, not-for-profit sector, not so much, okay? When it comes to how people relate within organizational structures, in the normal things that people have to do, more women, of course, found themselves doing housekeeping duties. So say, for example, we are in a board meeting or a departmental meeting, yeah, carrying the tea, doing the, those kinds of things, than men. And then, of course, slightly more women than men felt that their opinions did not carry as much weight. And that, I think, resonates with what Dr. Itotia mentioned a few minutes ago, that on the one hand, you have this double jeopardy. You are young and you're a woman, So you will talk because we need to have it minuted that you talked, but it's not that whatever you said is going to carry any weight in terms of decision making. Now, when it comes to leadership as a cross-cutting idea, okay, both men and women felt that the leadership in these healthcare organizations were responsive, they were responsible, and they were generally accessible, okay? But to a minimal, although statistically significant level, more women felt that they had missed out on a leadership opportunity on the virtue or on the back of their gender. Now, when we probed a little bit further to try and find out probably why, and if, when you're looking at the why, you try to isolate between the kind of skill sets that you need for leadership or for management and for career advancement, more women reported that they missed out on formal courses to achieve higher qualifications, on management development programs, and on such things. We, however, had a very interesting, or rather we have an interesting dilemma that we are still probing. And that is that even though they felt that they missed out on these opportunities, maybe on occasion of their gender, on occasion of their lack of skills, at the same time, quite a number of them actually reported having been promoted. Okay? So there is a bit of attention there that we still need to unpack and really see where that could be. Now, the ones who are saying big words, are you now even more impressed? All you need to focus on is the first column, eh? Okay? So, which is this column here? And the reason why I want you to focus on that column is because what we were then trying to do is to relate all those things on that list there to number one, which is career advancement. And the basic idea is, supposing we were then to make an intervention at organizational level, okay? If we were to come into these healthcare organizations and say, wait a minute, the big idea, okay, we want more women up in those roles because there's a lot to benefit or to gain as an organization and as a country, as a county or whatever, when we have more of them in that space. So we need them to advance up the career level. So that is what is the dependent, the thing that we are correlating against. So we look at the organization and say, okay, fine. So what is it that we need to be able to work on? What is it that correlates most to this ascension from one level of management to the next level and the next? And as you can see there, that there's a strong correlation between policies, whether it is policies that operate organization-wide or policies that affect individual action within the organization. And that is this point here. Sorry, the pointer is not working. So right there and there. Okay. When you see 3 stars, it means that is really important. Okay? At least from a statistical perspective, there's a strong correlation, and that correlation is positive. So if we work on organization-level policies, if we work on policies that impact the way individuals carry out their work in organizations, then you expect more women to actually ascend up the ladder. That is what that means. Now, when we come to organizational culture, okay, we recategorize the organizational culture into 4 categories, okay? And you can see what is written there is clan culture, okay? Adhocracy, which is a more open, clan culture is more closed, okay? Adhocracy, which is a more kind of open kind of culture. Market culture, which is very target driven. And then hierarchical culture, which is more, you know, I mean, is very much based on relationships and who is where or who is supposed to be where. You know, we talked about leadership at that point. Now, if you focus on those 3, which is numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, you can see that there is one that is actually a negative, okay? And maybe it might tie in to some of the sentiments that were shared by the panels here. And the one that has a strong and negative correlation is you actually have 2. You have hierarchical culture, okay? It is negative, meaning that the more hierarchical the organization is, okay, or the more hierarchical we make our organizations, the harder it will be, okay, for women to go up this. But this was not it's negative, but it is not significant. However, the more market-oriented the organization is, the harder people are driven. And by the way, I want you to correlate this with some of the conversations we've had, because they are affirming each other. Remember, who was it who shared something around 18 hours, yeah? In working in some audit firm or something like this, yeah? You can now see where that is. Because working the 18 hours is chasing after a particular financial dream. And you can see that it actually plays out here in the data. Yeah? And it was shared in the morning that when it happens like that, it reaches a point where it is now no longer an either-or kind of situation for women. Women want both and. They want the career to advance, but they also want their social, family things to also work. And so they will push back. And we can see that in the data there. Now, what seems to work are the cultures in organizations that are more open, okay? So adhocracy, flatter structures, where you have smaller teams, teams that are invested, okay, in achieving team results, and team results that then build up into organizational, and so from an interventional perspective, the basic idea is, for those of us who are in organizational development, okay, how can we help organizations to have that kind of structure, as opposed to having a structure that is more market-oriented or that is more hierarchical in nature. And we all know that healthcare is actually quite hierarchical in terms of its ordering. Now, as I conclude, okay, on the aspect of leadership, we had 3 leadership styles, okay? And in the leadership styles, you can see we have a transformational, okay, leadership style, sometimes equated with level 5 leadership. You know, this is a more, how would you say, benevolent, looking out for the next person, mentorship kind of leadership. And then you have transactional leadership, which is where I'm paying you to do a job, so you better the F do it. And then you have a laissez-faire, I did not say that. Is it being recorded? Then you have a laissez-faire kind of leadership, which is an anything goes kind of leadership, okay? And as you can see here, that a transactional kind of relationship where the leadership style is sort of like, is very sanitized, okay? Again, does not seem to work very well, okay? For women seem to thrive under institutions that are led by people who seem to be genuinely interested in their growth and their transformation. And if that happens, then you'll be able to see this ascension. So the bottom line of our research is that when you try to do the various, you combine all the different questions that we asked, okay, and you break them apart and reconfigure them, and you try to correlate them, then this is the message. So, because of time, we will not go into some of the quotes, and what the team behind the research did was to make sure that throughout, as we have been sitting here during the breaks, you have been seeing videos, okay, of women in the health sector sharing, their stories. That is the qualitative aspect. When we combine that with what we did in the quantitative bit, we come up with these conclusions and recommendations, okay? A lot of them sound like things that we already know, but it is also good to know that within our particular context, that these seem to be timeless truths, and therefore we just need to hold ourselves to a much higher level of account so that we can actually actualize, because there are things that we know. Number 1, okay? Gender inclusive development programs, leadership development programs are important, particularly those aimed at nurturing talent, fostering mentoring relationships, and providing opportunities, okay? Number 2, we should have structures that promote transparency and accountability, not just in recruitment, but also in promotion. Number 3, we should invest in cultural sensitization, okay? And have a situation where we have organizational cultures that embrace equality. Number 4, the cultures that value and celebrate diversity. Number 5, if it will agree to come through, okay? That they need to be able to accommodate, organizational policies should be reconfigured to accommodate the diverse needs of women. Number 6, that organizations and the women in them should also consider establishing formalized networks and support groups, and this is more so for, you remember the slide I shared with you where we say that the boys club phenomenon, particularly in the private sector. So I'm speaking to my KEPSA and KHF colleagues here. Number 7, that leadership and boards of these organizations should also prioritize the promotion of diversity in their teams. And number 8, that we should encourage male colleagues to mentor and sponsor women leaders, because they currently are the ones who hold these positions. So, back to the beginning. What is your verdict? There's a ladder or there's no ladder? There's a ladder. Anything wrong with the ladder? Huh? What is wrong with it? Huh? All of it is broken. Huh? It's missing a few rungs, eh? So we can repair. At least we have a starting point and we can repair that ladder. So thank you very much for your attention. I can see my time is also up. June, over to you.